This talk is so much fun. Level up your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. We are going to code everything live tonight. And so we're going to build up a DevOps pipeline. We'll scaffold out a website. We'll build a Git ignore file, a Docker ignore file, and a Dockerfile. We'll build a Kubernetes YAML file. We'll build a DevOps pipeline in GitHub Actions, and we'll see that all running. I am so excited. There are no slides in this talk. And so here's the part where I tell you, I'm definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight, but there aren't any. But what is really cool is the code for this session is already online. You can go to github.com/robrich/levelupdevops, GitHub level up DevOps, GitHub Actions Kubernetes, and you will see all the code that we're going to build tonight, which there currently isn't any because we're going to build it. This is a pretty much empty repository, and I love this because we're going to build the everything here. If that URL is too long, head off to robrich.org, robrich.org, click on presentations, and here's Level Up Your DevOps so you can get straight to the code. If you want to join us tomorrow at Utah.js, then I'll be doing another talk about feature flags, and you can see that there, and find all of the other talks that I've done here as well. While we're here on robrich.org, thanks for the intro. You can go to About Me and see some of the things that I've done recently. Here's all of the things that I do. I work for a local nonprofit, and I'm a Microsoft MVP and Docker captain. So I get deep into .NET and also into containers. One of the things that I really enjoy is AZ Give Camp. AZ Give Camp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start building software Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver that completed software. Sleep is optional. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ Give Camp. Or if you'd like a Give Camp here in Salt Lake or wherever you're connecting from, find me on any of the socials or hit me up here at the user group or tomorrow at Utah.js. Let's get a Give Camp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, Pro Microservices in .NET 6 is really fun. Pro Microservices in .NET 10 will come out in November, and so I'm really excited about that. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air, and they sent me a mug. Woo! So there's my claim to fame, my coveted .NET Rocks mug. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, post on our Facebook. No, I'm just kidding. Richard Campbell's awesome, though. So let's build a website. Now, I have here an empty folder. Kubernetes is empty as well. And so let's start by scaffolding out a website. Now, we can scaffold out any website. I'm going to say .NET New, and that'll be kind of fun. We can take a look at the templates. Here's some of the templates that I've got installed, but we could also say .NET New list and see the full list of templates that we've got. That's quite a lot. Let's say .NET New. We'll build an MVC site. I'm going to give it some optional parameters, the name and the output. Now, both of these are optional. If I didn't specify a name, it would use my folder name. So in this case, demo. If I didn't give it an output, it would make a new folder inside of it. So it'd make a demo folder inside my demo folder and put the demo project inside there. And I really wanted to call it Level Up DevOps in the current folder, so I passed these two parameters. So now we've got a website there. Let's open that up in VS Code, and we can see our website. Now it's a full website. We have here a home controller, an index action that comes into our index view, and so we can see welcome to slc.net, and we've got a website. GitHub Copilot is helping. It knows where we're going. So great, we've got a full website. Now, our next step is to get it set up to commit it to source control. Now, depending on how we provisioned our GitHub repository, we might have gotten a .git ignore for us, but let's build one ourselves because we want to be a little bit more methodical about that. .git ignore. Now, in Windows, leading with a dot is hard, so you can definitely create this file in Visual Studio or VS Code or whatever IDE you're using, but inside of Windows Explorer, it's a little bit hard. Okay, so here we start talking about bin and obj, and then maybe there's, star.user and star.suo, and there's just, a massive collection of files. You probably have a list that's 2 or 3 or 5 screens long. Let's be a little bit more engineering about this. There's 5 groups of things that we want to ignore in a git ignore file. We want to ignore downloaded files, built files, user specific files, temp files, and secrets. Now, if you look through your git ignore file that you've built up over years in your project, or the one that GitHub created for you, you can find each of these 5 groups. But you probably don't call it out that way. But I call it out here because it's a really elegant way to kind of look at how we build the things and ensure that we've got everything put in the proper spot. Downloaded files. If we were in a .NET Framework project, we would have packages. If we were in a Node project, we'd have Node modules. In this project, we have neither of them. So I'll leave that section blank. Built files, we have bin and obj. We might also have dist, although here inside www root and lib, we actually have some dist folders, so we might choose to ignore this. We'll come back to that one. Towards user-specific files, we have the star.suo, we have star.user. Let's ignore the .vs folder. We can argue about if the VS Code folder should be checked in or not. And then, other files, like if I'm on a Mac at the ds store file, star.tmp, star.orig. If I'm in the middle of a git merge and I break out of it, there's other files here. We might also want to ignore star.zip, star.sql, just other files that might get big that we might drop into this folder. Temp files, well, okay, so that's where star.tmp and star.orig probably need to go. And I guess dsstore is also a temp file. There we go. And then secrets. If we're in a Node project, we have a .env file. In actually most projects, we have a .env file. In .NET, we have app settings. Now here in app settings, we might have something like connection strings. And I have my DB, and here's that. Well, now I have secrets in this file. That's probably not a good place to put them. I'm going to say use envvars. Of course, if I start this application, it's going to blow up and say that's not a valid connection string, but it's enough of a clue for me to say, I need to configure this in a different way. Don't check the secrets in here. Excellent. So in appsettings.development.json, then we might do this as well. Oh, not Kestrel. Connection strings and MyDB. And well, now we've got secrets in here still. Let's not do this and say use user secrets. Again, this will blow up if I'm debugging inside of my IDE, and I want it to because I want it to give me that clue that I need to look over there for those details. Perfect. So I have an extension here inside of my VS Code, the .NET Core user secrets. This is built into Visual Studio already. And so that means that if I right-click on this project, I can say manage user secrets. And now I get my secrets.json. Notice how this isn't in my user directory. It's off in my profile directory. The other thing that this did was in my CS proj, it defined this user secrets ID. Well, that just needs to be unique. It doesn't need to be a GUID. So let's change it to level up DevOps. And now, as I wander through my user profile directory, I'll have a whole lot more descriptive feel to this. And I'll be able to know which secrets go with which project. Not necessary, but it's a good nice to have here to set your user secrets ID. So if I come back in here and I say manage user secrets, now we can see that's the actual connection to my database, and it's nowhere near my source code. I'm not going to check this file in. Excellent. So we wanted to keep user secrets out of here, so we don't need to ignore these 2 files because we made sure that secrets aren't in these files. Perfect. Here's our git ignore file. Any concerns or thoughts or questions so far about our .gitignore file or our scaffolded website? Excellent.
Hey,
Well, now that
actually,
we have our gitignore file,
hey Rob,
let's, Go ahead.
Is there something like from your experience that people sometimes add or forget to add to their git ignore that like typically goes wrong? Like something that people may not always consider from your experience?
The big thing that I find people forgetting is, big files like star.zip, star.tar, star.tar.gz, those types of big files easily get in there. If you ignore bin and obj, then you don't also need to ignore debug and release, but, calling those out can be good too. But as we get closer to committing, I'll definitely show you a trick to be able to find things that don't make sense that you may want to add to your .gitignore file.
Awesome.
Great
Thank you.
call out. Thanks for that. So we've built a gitignore. Now next, let's start moving towards containers. Let's build a .docker ignore. Now, what's cool about a .docker ignore is it has pretty much the same syntax as a gitignore file. So let's start with our gitignore file and just copy that into place. And now we've got a Docker ignore file. Now we have our same thing, downloaded files, built files, user-specific files, temp files, and secrets. But in our Docker ignore file, we also have a sixth thing, which is non-production files. So let's add that, non-production files. And these are all of the things that debugging stuff. So let's say app settings.development.json. We might even want to go as far as saying app settings.anything.json, because we have the two dots on either side, then it will still add app settings.json. That's good. And we also want to ignore this launch settings.json. This is all the Kestrel settings that we might have. Maybe we have IIS settings in here too. We don't need that. Launch settings.json. And this highlights the one big difference between a Docker ignore file and a git ignore file. A git ignore file will recursively look through all directories looking for a match, where a Docker ignore file will assume that you're looking at the base directory. And because this one is inside a nested directory, let's say inside any recursively nested directories, then go find that file. So you might actually see people come through their Docker ignore file, just adding that to each folder. It's going to do this here, and I'll leave it to the reader to add the other ones if they'd like to. That Docker ignore file having the ** is kind of the only difference, that and the non-production files, between the git ignore file. So now we have a Docker ignore file. That's perfect. This is everything that will never get copied into our Docker container. Even if we specifically ask for that file to get copied, it still won't get copied in. I hope that saves you the few hours it took me to figure that out, because I was like, I just want to copy this. Oh, it's listed in my Docker ignore file. Next, let's create a Dockerfile. New file, Dockerfile. Now it's important this be named Dockerfile and not Dockerfile.txt. And so by default, Visual Studio likes to add the .txt. If it did, easy enough, rename it with no extension. Windows Explorer doesn't like things without extensions too, so it may take a little bit of doing. So now here in this Docker file, I happen to have the container container tools extension, and I also have the Docker DX extension. And that gives me this cool icon here, and it also gives me some IntelliSense here in these files. So there's 4 main verbs inside of a Docker file: from, copy, run, and cmd. Now there's other commands, and we'll see other ones here today, but these are the 4 main ones that we'll look at. And if you know these 4, you can pretty much read and write any Docker file, which is really great. Let's start out with from. We want to stand on the shoulders of giants, so we want a base image that has the tools that we need to be able to build and run .NET projects. So let's head off to, oh, haha, I didn't do that part yet. We'll come back to that one. Let's head up to Docker Hub, and we'll search for Microsoft.net, and we'll land here on this one that is actually a meta repository. There aren't any containers here, but connect to for .NET. .NET samples shows us lots of different Docker files. .NET Aspire dashboard. Aspire is amazing. .NET Monitor. Runtime depths is where we start building up our solution. Runtime depths includes everything you would need to install .NET, but .NET is not yet installed. Built on top of that is .NET Runtime that has the ability to run console apps, but not web servers. Built on top of that is ASP.NET. Now we can run web servers, but we don't have compile tools. And built on top of that is SDK, where we can start to build .NET projects. That's where we want to start out. So let's go into here, and we'll get to the GitHub repository for .NET's Docker container, and we'll grab this. Well, actually, we'll grab .NET 9 because that's our project here. We're using a .NET 9 project. And so we'll say from that. Now, as we start looking at tags, we can come in here to the mcr.microsoft.com. We can search for this repository, and I'll search for Alpine. Alpine is a really, really small Linux distribution. And so this will make our containers download a whole lot faster on our Kubernetes environment. It will allow us to build and push them to our repository, our container registry a lot easier. And there's a 9.0 -Alpine. Let's use that. So -Alpine, and we've got that ready to go. Now, one thing, I don't have a solution. Oh, I do have a demo.solution. Let's actually delete that because we don't want that one. Let's scaffold out a new solution file. .NET new solution. I'll give it a name of level up DevOps. And now I have that level up DevOps.solution file. We'll say .NET solution, add the CS proj file. And now if I cat level up DevOps.sln, we can see that it has a reference to that project. Ugh, this solution file is just all kinds of gunk. It's let's talk about the new solution format, slnx, which is actually an XML file that is so much simpler. Here's an example of a slnx file. It's just a simple XML file. In the same way that we migrated CS proj files to the new, simpler format, we can migrate solution files as well. So let's do that. .NET sln migrate. And now we have our old solution file, which we don't need anymore. Wow, that's a whole lot of mayhem. Delete. And we have our new solution file, which is really simple. That's nice. We have our configurations. This is optional. And we have our projects. That's just really, really simple. Nice. So now back in our Docker file. Oh, any questions about our new solution file? I find that solution.x so much nicer. Cool. Back in our Docker file, let's copy everything from the directory where we run our Docker build command, that'll be this directory, to the directory inside of our image. Well, where is that directory? Well, let's say workdir is /src. Now we could say var lib foo bar, and it would recursively create and cd into those directories if we wanted to. But in this case, /src is fine. Cool. So now we've got all of these files in there, except for everything we chose to ignore, which is very nice. Now let's run some commands. Now, how would we build this from a command line if we were just on a PowerShell command line? Well, we'd say .NET restore, then .NET build. Let's build in release mode. Then .NET test. Let's run all of our unit tests. And no build is kind of nice. We just built, so we don't need to. And then .NET publish. We'll publish in release mode to the app folder, and we'll publish level up devops.cs proj. Cool. Now, those are the commands that we would run on the command line to get from our source code to the content that we would need to publish to IIS or to Nginx or wherever we wanted to run this. So how might we turn these into a Docker command? Well, we can go like this, and we can go like this, and this, and this, and we can run all of those as Docker commands. Cool. GitHub Copilot knows where we're going. So now we've got those as Docker commands, and these will all run at build time as we're building up our image. And now we have that content here in the app directory. So let's set some environment variables. Let's set the ASP.NET Core URLs to 8080. We'll expose 8080 as well. We'll also set the end ASP.NET Core environment to production. We also want to set the end of connection strings, my DB, and in this case, we'll set it to blank. We do want to set that as an environment variable, so we're just making the space for that environment variable to fit here.
And we may have a hand up if you're open to a question from Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel, what's your thoughts?
And you're on mute.
Oh, you can forget that, because it was a simple question, like how does the SLNX file basically, how does it condense everything we saw in the SLN file to what's now in the cleaner XML file? But I can just read that. I can just read that article you're in right now later on, and not
that's perfect.
Mess with the presentation.
Yeah. Here's that project reference. And so, there's that CS proj. We don't need these GUIDs anymore. And then this big thing, it defines all of the configurations, and then it maps each project in each configuration to each project in each configuration, which, okay, by convention, they're usually the same. And so all of that stuff, listing the projects, listing the configurations, that's exactly what we do right here. Just let's list the configurations and list the projects. It's so much simpler. It has the same information. It's just, it's so much simpler. Here's that. I'll add this to chat. There's that blog post that talks about the SolutionX file. Great question, Daniel. Cool. So I've set some environment variables. We want to change our work dir to /app because that's where we built to. And then we want to set a CMD. Now here's that CMD, .NET level up DevOps.dll. Now, if we're on a command line, we're probably saying .NET run. But because we built and published, .NET run is looking for a CS proj file, which no longer exists. So we'll just run our DLL straight away. Now I could do the other syntax where I said cmd.net level up DevOps, but what that would turn into is it would say sh-c .net level up DevOps. And so now I have that nested shell in here. If I use this parameters, then by the way, it's better at figuring out where the spaces are, the difference in parameters, and it also avoids that nested shell. So that's why I'll do the CMD there. Cool. We have a Dockerfile. Now this Dockerfile, we could definitely go to production with this, but there's a couple of things we can do to kind of tidy this up, to make it a little cleaner, to follow a few best practices here with Dockerfiles. The first thing that we're going to do is we don't want build tools and source code in our production container. If we have build tools and our source code, and someone is able to pop this container, they could download our source or upload their own code and compile it and start to replace the pieces in our thing. Let's come back to Docker Hub, and we'll look at the ASP.NET container. And this one, let's use the 9 variety. It also has an Alpine variant. And let's come in here and say, from There, we'll use the Alpine variant. And now we're building two different images. This one is our production runtime server image, and this one is our build server image. Now, I put server in air quotes because they're not servers, they're containers, but we can kind of think of them as servers. So this top one is the build server that has all of the build tools on it. And this one is our production runtime image where we only have the deployed content. So this image is going to be significantly smaller. It now doesn't have build tools or source code. And so that will make it publish faster. And it also fits that best practice of not having source code in our app. Cool. The next thing that we want to look at here is, well, let's imagine that we come in here and we're starting to mess with some JavaScript code, or maybe we change some C# code. Docker is going to invalidate this layer right here. That's the layer that watches for these files to change. And this layer, .NET Restore, that's probably a significant amount of our build time, downloading those libraries. We kind of want to do it this way. We want to restore first so that we can cache those dependencies and then copy in all of our source code. Now we still need our manifest. We still need to know what things we're going to restore. So let's copy in our level up devops.x into the current folder and our csproj files. And now that we know what we need to restore, then we can restore and cache that, and then copy in all of the rest of the files. Well, except for what we're choosing to ignore. Now we could definitely take more control over these layers. We could do something like this and combine these commands all into one layer. But since this is the build server and we're not going to publish that, then condensing these layers may not make sense. And I really like that when the tests fail, this is the line that fails in our Dockerfile. When we have a build fail, this is the line that fails in our Dockerfile. And having that information in our build output is actually very helpful. So there we go. We've got a finished Dockerfile that will run great in production. Any questions or concerns? Any thoughts about our Dockerfile?
Hi Rob. By any chance, can we add the health check in the Docker file?
What do we need to check in the Dockerfile?
I mean, health check instruction, something like
a
health check.
Health check. Yeah, we didn't include the health check. We also didn't include the other things here. The app folder doesn't have the reference to this code. I'm not going to include the health check because I'll typically include that in Kubernetes instead. And Kubernetes actually ignores the Dockerfile health check instructions. But I like where you're going. Definitely having a health check inside our Kubernetes deployment is a good idea. Good move.
Okay. Thanks.
So to get our code into here, we need to copy the content from the app directory into the current directory. To make that a little bit more obvious, I'll make this the dist directory. And right now it's going to go look for the dist directory out here, except for we've chosen to ignore it. So we need to say, let's copy from equals build. Now what is build? Let's call this one as build. Now there's nothing magic about the word build. We could call this foo or step one or whatever we want, but I think build is descriptive. We could call this one as final or as runtime, but since we won't use that name, I'll just leave it off. Great. So now it's going to go look in the dist directory of the build stage. It's going to find the build stage, find the dist directory, and copy all of that content into place. There we go. So now that we've got our Docker file, the next step for us is to create a Kubernetes YAML file that will deploy all of this content. Let's do that. New file, k8s.yaml. And I have an extension here in Visual Studio. I have the Kubernetes extension right here. And then I also have the Kubernetes extension depends on the Red Hat YAML extension. And with those two, I get some really, really cool things. Because this file is a format YAML, I can do things like this. Deployment. Yeah, level up DevOps. And it just filled in a lot of things. I'm going to set this to ACR URL / level up DevOps, and I'll call this image label. And now we'll be able to, here it's asking for not only the resource limits, but also the resource requests. And so now that will be less grumpy. I'll also add the container port right there. And now I've got a deployment. I might also choose to say replicas here. In this case, I'll just say replicas 1. If I'm using a horizontal pod autoscaler, I may comment that out and use the horizontal pod autoscaler instead. I'm also going to add a version here and use the same image label there. And so we'll tag our pods with the version that we deployed to. Now that we've got a deployment, let's create a service in front of that will round robin between the pods. Service. Go gadget, create me a service. Level up DevOps. And I'm going to have it match that selector. Let's do this port is 8080. And this target port is 8080 as well. And we have our service. Let's create an ingress as well. Ingress, level up DevOps. I don't need the Kubernetes name, but we will have other labels if we need it. Our host will be level up devops.aks URL. And we'll forward this off to the level up DevOps service. Nice. Now that I've got that ingress in place, I do need to do these replacement expressions as part of the build. And if I have more than a couple, then I'll probably flip over to Helm. But Helm is probably a little bit bigger than what we want to take on today. So I'll just use sed to replace these instead. Let's add some TLS goodness in here. And so I'm going to come in here and replace these. And I'm just going to add an annotation that says, let's use let's encrypt. And I'll use an ingress class name of nginx and set some TLS details. I'll store that detail in the TLS secret. And now let's encrypt will do all the things. To do that, I do need to hook up Let's Encrypt. So let's get Cert Manager installed using Helm. We'll also deploy the nginx ingress. And we do need to also create an ingress. Here's the ingress that talks about that TLS section. And we do need to build a Cert Manager as well. So all of that is in my Kubernetes cluster already. And so now we have a Kubernetes YAML file that's ready to go. Oh, there's one more thing that we want to do. We want to put here the environment. ASP.NET Core environment of production, ASP.NET Core URLs, and the name connection strings, my DB, and I would want to put my database connection string in here. There we go. Now, yep, this is a secret. And so we probably want to move this into a Kubernetes secret, and I will leave that to the reader to make that happen. Because these are already baked into our container, we don't need to put these in Kubernetes as well. It's kind of nice to show that that's what it's set to. And so I don't mind leaving these in place, even though they're redundant. Cool. We've got a Kubernetes YAML file. Any questions about, any thoughts about our Kubernetes YAML file? To your question, here's where I would create that health check. In this case, I don't have a health URL, so I'll just load the home page. And so that's how I would do a health check inside of Kubernetes.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. In Kubernetes, there's actually 3 different things. There's a readiness probe, knowing how to get started up. And there's a liveness probe. And then there's also there's a third probe whose name I've forgotten. Readiness probe and liveness
startup
probe. Startup probe?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is the readiness probe.
No,
this one tells it when
there
the
are 3
pod is
distinct
ready.
ones in Kubernetes: startup, readiness, and liveness. The startup one
Startup,
is...
readiness, and liveness. Yeah.
Yes.
There we go. Yeah. Which is a lot of YAML. I'm just going to leave it out for simplicity today. Cool. So we've got our Kubernetes YAML file, we've got our Docker file, we've got a Docker ignore file telling us what not to put into our container. We've got the git ignore file, we've got the website. Let's also create a README, new file, readme.md, and we'll just put some simple stuff here in this README. And there we go. We're ready to commit. Anything else we should add to this repository before we send it up to GitHub? I love to spend a lot of time. Yeah, workflow, yes. We'll do a workflow on GitHub. Good call, JM. So I love to spend a lot of time here in this dialog. Let's look through all the things and match this to the things that we want to ignore. We want to make sure that we don't have downloaded files, built files, user-specific files, temp files, secrets. Oh, look, here's a whole lot of downloaded stuff. It looks like we've got Bootstrap, we've got jQuery for some reason. Let's see if we can eliminate these libraries out of our repository. Now they are referenced by this layout page right here. Here's that Bootstrap. So let's go to cdn.js and see if we can find this library. I'm going to look for Bootstrap and I'll grab this library. And I can grab the CSS link. Let's copy that link tag. And now I can go replace this reference to a local file with the reference to the CDN. And now I'm using somebody else's bandwidth. That is kind of nice. So let's do the same thing down here in the footer. We'll replace both the Bootstrap reference and the jQuery reference. And let's get those gone. We also have here in this validation scripts partial a reference to 2 more libraries. Let's copy this out and reference the CDN there. And now, because we've eliminated the reference to our local libraries, we can now delete this whole lib folder. We don't need this at all. Perfect. Let's delete the lib folder. And now coming back here into our source control, we can see that now, yep, we've only got the files that we want in here. We don't have any downloaded files. We don't have any built files. We don't have any user-specific files. We don't have any temp files, and we don't have any secrets. We can even pop open our app settings and double check that there aren't any secrets here. Excellent. So to your question early on, how do we know what files we should add to our gitignore file? If you spend some time here in this commit dialog and get really comfortable with what you're about to stage, you'll learn what you need to add to your gitignore file. Let's stage all these changes and say level up DevOps website, and we will commit it. Excellent. Now that we've got that content committed, git log. Let's git push that up to GitHub. And if you've been following along, waiting for this to actually have some content, we can see that now we have our website. Woo! Here's our website. We've got our Docker ignore file, our Git ignore file, our Docker file. We've got our Kubernetes YAML file, our README file that nicely renders down here. We're doing really good at getting this site into place. Next, let's build a workflow. Wizardry, yes. Let's come here into GitHub Actions and let's see if yep. Now we can start to build a DevOps pipeline. Now there's lots of different templates. It will, looks like it noticed that we're building a Docker image. We could use a bunch of different templates here. There's also a bunch of templates, deployment templates, security templates. We could scan our containers and do SBOM things and continuous integration things and automation and static site generators. And then there's a bunch more categories as well. Or we can start with a simple one that is completely, totally blank. I'm going to actually search for simple because it's not quite blank, but it is quite empty. And let's start there because we really want to craft this DevOps pipeline rather than kind of just take the defaults. Now, it is just a file inside .github/workflows. It ends with either YAML or YML. So I'll change that to YAML and I'll say Docker Kubernetes there. Now let's build out the details for our DevOps pipeline. Docker build Kubernetes run. Now, how do we want to start this? Well, we want to run it on the main branch. That looks good. We'll come back to pull requests. We probably don't want that right now. And we do want the workflow dispatch. If ever you've committed just a space or a carriage return just to get it to kick off the build, workflow dispatch is that piece. You'll end up with a build dialog over here that will allow you to just kick off the build without having to commit garbage into your repository and fill up your history. Next, let's talk about what we're going to do. Well, the first step is we want to check out our source code. Perfect. And then we can either run a single command or we can run a multi-line script with this pipe just to say the rest of these are shell scripts. So let's do that. I want to say, let's do Docker build and push kubectl apply. That's what we'll want to do. So first step, let's do a Docker build. Docker build, let's tag this as level up DevOps straight away and dot to give it a context so we know what folder to build in. If our content was inside a source directory, we might want to say cd src, but we built it in the root, so we don't need that. Well, this repository wasn't quite empty. I did come in here to settings and secrets and actions, and I did create some secrets here in this repository just so that we could have these to reference as we were doing the build. Now, these secrets aren't, I'm not going to show you the content of these secrets, of course, but these secrets are definitely in place. So how might we use these secrets? Well, for example, the ACR URL, our Docker container registry inside of Azure. How do we reference that? Well, let's come here into the settings and we'll click on settings and we'll create the secret. That's what we've done previously. And now how do we use these? Well, we can just come in here and use this syntax, $, secrets dot that secret, and then curly curly, and that's how we'll reference that secret in the middle of our pipeline. Now, this is one of the things that's different between different things. If I was in Azure DevOps, I would have a little bit different syntax. If I was in Jenkins, I would have slightly different syntax, but it's not substantially different. So let's go here and we'll say secrets.acr URL. And now we're tagging it with our container registry. Let's also give it a label, and we'll give this a label of github.sha. That's our Git hash. And yes, this isn't Semver, but it is specific to this source code version. And so now we know that that's going to be, that container image is what was built from that version in our Git repository. Perfect. So now that we've built that image, it's going to run all of the steps in our Dockerfile. Let's say Docker push this image up to our Docker registry. Well, where is that registry? How do we authenticate to it? Let's come into the marketplace here and let's look for Docker login. Ooh, Docker login. We can view the full marketplace listing, and this will show us all kinds of things about how to use it. We may get access to the source code for it, and that's really helpful if we want to dig deep into this. But we can also just look at this right here and just kind of see a snippet of how it's used. That's probably completely sufficient for where we're going today. Let's put this right here. We do need to indent it a little bit differently. So let's do it there. And now we've got our Docker login. Let's configure it a bit. We want to use our registry. Excellent. Let's come in here and grab our ACR URL, and we will set that in place here. We have a username. We've got a secret for that. Let's do ACR username. We need a password. So let's do our ACR password. And we're not using AWS container service, so we don't need that. And logout. Let's say logout is true. Now, if we're in a shared host, then it's important for us to clear these secrets at the end of the build. It isn't at the end of this task, but rather at the end of this entire run. We don't want the next build to be able to reach into our secrets and continue on into our content. So we definitely want to log out. In the case of our GitHub Actions running on github.com, then that happens automatically. The build agent gets recycled shortly after our build. But we'll say true just in case. So we Docker build, Docker push, and now that content is in our container registry, in this case, Azure Container Registry up on Azure. Next, we want to push this into Kubernetes. kubectl apply-f k8s.yaml. Cool. Well, what Kubernetes cluster is this? Let's head back to this full marketplace listing and let's search for Kubernetes set context. Ooh, this one looks good. This will allow us to be able to set our context so that we know what cluster we're connecting to. So let's put that here, and we need to indent it a little bit better. Let's indent it there, and now we can do it. Cool. Now we're going to use a kubeconfig because that has all the details, and our kubeconfig secret comes in here. Secrets kubeconfig. And then because we're using the kubeconfig, we don't need any of the rest of these. Excellent. Well, where did I get that kubeconfig? Well, I went into my profile directory, which I'm definitely not going to do today, into my .kube folder. I opened up the config file, and there's that path. And I grabbed the details that reference my Azure Kubernetes service. So I removed the details for Docker Desktop or Podman. I didn't need those. And so, of course, I snipped out the certificates out of this. But these details, that's my kubeconfig. And so those are the details that I set here into this kubeconfig secret. Excellent. So if I reference that kubeconfig secret here, then now it knows what Kubernetes cluster it needs to apply to. Perfect. Now there is one more step here. Here in our Kubernetes YAML file, we have these replacement expressions like image label and ACR URL and AKS URL. We didn't want to check those secrets into our cluster, into our GitHub repository. So let's just reference those secrets, or set those secrets into place here. So I will come in here and let's grab this sed command, and I will set it right here. Now the sed command, without a backup, is going to replace the text ACR URL with the secret, AKS URL with the secret, and image label with the GitHub SHA. So AKS URL in all the places, ACR URL, image label in all the places, it will get that into place. Now I'm specifically saying -G or /G, so it will do it in all of the instances. Now, I've only done 3 replacement expressions, so this isn't bad, But if I had maybe a half a dozen or a dozen, I would probably flip over to Helm. I could also use YQ to be able to replace some expressions inside of my YAML file if I'd like to. In this case, I just went super low tech, and I'm just going to do it with sed instead. Ooh, interesting. In or willing to consider presenting? If so, please submit a proposal. Ooh, I love this part. Do submit a proposal if you'd like to see a topic there. And one of the questions it will ask you is, who's the presenter? And if you don't want to be the presenter, suggest me. I would love to present. So here's our GitHub Actions build. We're going to first check out our code, then we'll log into Docker, we'll log into Kubernetes, then we'll do all of our all the steps inside of our Dockerfile, which will .NET restore, build, test, and publish. And then given that published image, we'll push that to our container registry, we'll replace our secrets, and then send that into Kubernetes. Now, one of the things that I did is I did this here. What if I did this here instead? Well, if I did this here and then say, I don't know, I forgot to add k8s.yaml to my Docker ignore file, then those secrets might end up inside my container. If someone was able to pop my container, they could also get my deployment secrets as well. So I'm going to wait until my container is pushed up to my container registry, and then I'm going to start putting secrets into my Kubernetes YAML file. I'm also going to touch up my Docker ignore file too. Dockerfile probably has some secrets in there too. Excellent. So now we've got our GitHub Actions build, and the cool part is we can just commit it to our registry. I'm going to say this is, thank you, GitHub Copilot, build DevOps pipeline, and we'll commit it. Now, the cool part is this is just a file in our repository. We could come into this file, we could click edit again, and we would be back in there where we've got the marketplace, and we can do all kinds of things there. Or because it's just a file, we can come in here and we can say git pull, and we can continue editing this file here in our project. So I can just pop open this file and I can start to make changes. Cool. But also, because we have a file inside of our .github/workflows directory, then we just kicked off a build. Let's take a look at that build. Now it's going to do all of the steps. In this case, it's already green, and it just published a new container to Kubernetes. kubectl get all, and we can see that we've got a running pod, we've got our deployment and service, we've got our ingress up in place, and so if we've also set up our DNS, we can come here and we can view our running website. Woo! That worked. That was so cool. Here is that website that didn't exist an hour ago and is now running inside of Kubernetes. Any questions or thoughts on how we got that DevOps pipeline? Let's come back to pull requests, because we did talk about pull requests here. Now, we could definitely do stuff like if and talk about the types of things that we wanted to do with pull requests, but our pull request build is going to be substantially different. So instead, let's just duplicate this build and create a new build for pull request. Docker PR, and I will change this to Docker build a PR. And this is no longer Docker build and push, it's Docker build a PR. And so in our PR build, we probably don't want to run this in Kubernetes. So let's delete that line. So we don't need to set our secrets in place. We can delete that line. We're not using Kubernetes, so we can delete that whole section. We don't want to push this up to the registry because we don't want to accidentally run a pull request container later. So we don't even need to log into Docker. To that end, we don't even need to reference the secrets at all. Let's just tag this as level up DevOps-PR. We're not going to push it anywhere. As soon as this build finishes, we'll just throw this image away. But we're still going to run all the steps inside of our Dockerfile. We'll still validate the build run successfully. We'll still run all of our tests. We'll still do all of the pieces. We might even choose to launch this container and maybe run some Cypress tests or other tests to be able to validate that the container works as expected. But here's our PR build. Let's also come in here to our GitHub Actions, and we will come back to our pipeline, and we can see there's that run workflow button. That's really nice. Let's go grab a status badge that will show on our GitHub homepage. Let's open up the README and we'll set that status badge right there. And now let's commit these changes. Ooh, we changed our Docker file. We're now correctly ignoring those secret files. I'm actually going to move those into the secret section. That'll be the proper spot for that. We added our status badge. We added the PR build. And so this is looking really good. Create PR build and status badge. Last time we pushed from the command line, let's push inside of VS Code this time. Push that up to GitHub. And now we can see that run. Last time we went in this way. This time let's go in this way to actions. Here's our build. Oh, oh, I see I forgot a piece. Here in this PR build, we want to make sure that it runs on not main. And we also want to say pull request branches. And here we're going to say we want it to run on all branches. That's better. Let's stage this. And I'm going to commit amend, create a status badge. And now I'm going to do that thing that you should never do. Git push origin main -f, force push. And now let's go see that new build. Very nice. So it's no longer creating a PR build. Excellent. But let's watch all the build steps that it does do. So it's going to, there we go. Check out, pull down the base images that we'll use. And then it runs a .NET build. It looks like that .NET build succeeded. But it's still going. There, it succeeded. We have no tests, so we have no failing tests. It published into the other stage. It pushed that up to our Azure container registry. And then it's going to apply those changes into Kubernetes. There it goes. And now our build is green. Excellent. So if we come back to the home page of our website, we can see that we now have that status badge that shows us our build succeeding. Excellent. And then because we chose to tag our pod with the image label, we can take a look here. Let's say git log. Here's our commit history, 5b2dd, git log -1. And then I'm going to say kubectl get pods, kubectl describe pod / this pod right here. And if we take a look at the labels here up at the top, we know that 5b2dd is the commit, and we can see this 5b2dd label on our pod. So if ever we want to know what is the source code version in this container, we can just git check out that exact git hash. It's not Semver, but it is a really nice link back to the source code that we need. Now, this was really cool. We started with a completely empty repository. We now have all of the steps to get from nothing to a running website, and you can grab all of that at github.com/robrich/levelup DevOps GitHub Actions Kubernetes, or head to robrich.org/presentations, and you can find it right there. If you're watching this time shifted, definitely leave me a comment on any of the socials. Head off to robrich.org and hit me up there. But for those here live at the event, what are your thoughts? What are your concerns? What should we add to this presentation next time? Blue-green deployment. Yes. In this case, when we did a kubectl apply, we just cut over. But we could use, say, Istio and be able to do blue-green deployments, definitely beyond the scope of this presentation. But yes, blue-green is awesome.